Okay, so bonjour, welcome everybody, hello. Welcome to the Philosophy Club here in Little Britain, the heartland of old Gaul, a magical place. And it's a pleasure to be here with guests, old and new. And it's Sunday the 23rd of February. I'll do a little summary of this last week since we last met. What's been happening in the world. I mean, it's very interesting watching the world and the politics and the posturing of our leaders who seem to have psychological, narcissistic tendencies, some of them. I've been following all that with great interest, attending meetings as usual. I attended a talk by Paul Gilbert, who's a professor of psychology at the University of Derby this week. And he was speaking about compassion therapy. He's worked in the NHS for years as a psychologist, working with people with all kinds of mental illness, emotional difficulties, depression. And he's basically discovered that if you come from a place of compassion and you make that your leitmotif, then people respond and healing happens. Now he was talking about the physiology of the brain and how compassion works, actually. Neurologists are now studying this. It's quite interesting. So that was very interesting. I've been attending a conference online with the European Movement, which I belong to, which is an international network of people that support the idea of one Europe, but want to discuss and debate what kind of Europe we want. The British lot that I belong to, we want to rejoin the European Union, but how, when, how would it work? How do we persuade enough fellow countrymen that that's a good thing? All these are very interesting. And so there were three speakers. One is a professor of political science at King's College London, who spoke. And then there was a woman who was a British diplomat and ambassador for many years. She was the British ambassador to Georgia in the Caucasus for a lot of time. And, highly intelligent, well-educated. She's now sort of semi-retired, but she's ended up in Washington, D.C. I think she might have had some mission in the embassy in Washington, and now she's adopted American citizenship. So she's like a dual citizen, I guess. And she was just describing what it's like in Trump Town at the moment. This was about 3 days ago. And how it's crazy, it's broken all the kind of normal protocols of international diplomacy, and Trump is like tearing up the rule book when it comes to international relations that she was educated in. And she gave a very good talk, actually, about what it's like in DC at the moment. And then there was another speaker who is the head of a thing called Open Britain, which is a lobbying group gathering intellectuals that want a more open, transparent, democratic society. Don't like sort of secrecy and especially corrupt money coming into Britain from abroad that is buying political influence. We're campaigning against Elon Musk's offer to spend millions on Nigel Farage to amplify the hard right, just because he can. I mean, that should be against the law, in our opinion. And Mark Kiernan, who runs Open Britain, thinks the same. I think it's scandalous that that is even a possibility, and it should be outlawed. Of course, it should be. It's interesting to watch. Yeah. So we were discussing, and there was questions and debate about, well, what can we do about this? Well, I think and of course Keir Starmer's off to Washington in 2 days' time. His ambassador Peter Mandelson was asked what did he think of Zelensky's Trump's put down of Zelensky and so on. And Mandelson, being the professional diplomat, said, "A very interesting speech." Which is like, yeah, that's all you can say, really. But I think Mandelson will give a good performance as Britain's ambassador to the US, and perhaps maybe try and educate some of the people he'll be meeting. I think we have a responsibility in Britain. We were the old country of actually helping to educate some of these feisty young adolescents, which is what they are in America. And I've lived in both countries. I know how they think, and that's how I see it anyway. Britain is an ancient, mature, cultured civilization. America is just a new experiment that just started a couple of 100 years ago, which is full of, it's craziness and certain psychological difficulties. And the breaking away from the mother is part of what's happening here, the psychological thing. So adolescent kids act out, they attack the mother, they're rude, they insult them. That's what they're doing to Europe, It's like a little adolescent kid pretending to be really angry and doing a tantrum in the garden. That's seeing it from the British perspective. And I think there's some truth to that. So anyway, that was a very interesting meeting I attended online. Yes, so it's been a busy week. I want to move to, I've been writing every day, 4 or 5 hours a day. I'm working on this commentary on the Gospel of Matthew, St. Matthew, at the moment, and I'm spending, 3 or 4 hours every morning on that. I've just spent actually 5-6 hours today on it. And I have to say it's absolutely fascinating. I wrote this book as an oral work. In 2011 it started, but then it took several years to complete. And I didn't actually finish the oral recording until I moved here to France, so it took a 10-year period to finish it. And I used all the kind of scholarly apparatus for what we know about Matthew and the Gospel. I used the Latin, the Greek, the Aramaic, the Hebrew. I went into all the details that scholars know, and of course we know a lot now. There's amazing research being done, which I presented, but I was more interested in the spiritual meaning of the texts. What was Christ actually trying to teach? I'm a philosopher of history and a scholar of transpersonal history, so I'm trying to ask, well, what was Christ thinking when he was saying that? What was his motivation for saying that? And what I've been working on this last week is what's called the Beatitudes, which are really amazing. It's very early on in Matthew's text. It's a sermon he gave on a mount overlooking the Sea of Galilee. Historians and geographers think they know the place. I've actually been there. I've got photographs of me sitting on that mount. It's a beautiful place. You can overlook the whole of the Sea of Galilee from there. It's not very tall. It shouldn't be a mount. It's like a hill. But it's got this amazing sense of overlooking the whole Sea of Galilee and all the little fishing villages that are there, and the one big town, Tiberias. So I've been going through, line by line, word by word, and discovering all kinds of depths in the Beatitudes that I kind of knew, but it's it's really, really interesting, and especially if you look at the Latin and the Greek, which is what I've been doing, and the Aramaic and Hebrew. So here's one in Latin: Beati mundo corde, quoniam ipsi Deum videbunt. So blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Huge thing, right? So I was explaining in the commentary on Matthew that means it's the equivalent of a Christian meditation practice. If you purify your mind of your daily anxieties, thoughts that, the monkey mind, as Chogyam Trungpa, the Tibetan Buddhist, called it, we're all full of, endless thoughts and anxieties and worries and, can I pay the electricity bill this month? How can I cope with blah, blah, blah? What about my friend that never gets in touch? It goes on all the time. If becoming pure in heart, I think, in my interpretation, is like the equivalent of a meditation practice. It's stilling the mind, stilling the anxieties of the heart, allowing all that to drop. And then, when you do that, the spiritual essence of yourself is then revealed. It's like the clouds will go away. And only then is when you can see God, who is the creator of everything, the mind, the divine mind, if you want. So what's really interesting is looking back at this commentary, which I did 11 years ago, and then I'm putting in the footnotes, I'm putting in the bibliographical references and making it into a scholarly text, whereas it was just a sort of inspired interpretation. And I recommend the Beatitudes. They are absolutely fascinating. So, and in the Greek as well. Like, for instance, the word pure in heart is kathar in Greek, which is the word for purity. And of course, here in France, the Cathars were a particular branch of Christians in the southwest, in the Pyrenees, who I think read that text very seriously. And they were trying to teach a way to purity that meant, not living in fancy palaces, not doing what the papacy was doing in its splendid, Vatican palaces and things. But the Cathars were farmers, people in the countryside, but they were sworn to peace, to non-violence. Men and women were both members of the Cathars, and purity was their big thing. But they got clobbered by the Catholic Church, which came down on them like a ton of bricks and sent a huge army from Paris, 100,000 soldiers, who were released from prison like thugs, who then went and slaughtered them all in a series of fiercely fought campaigns. When they got to Béziers, the bishop who was giving the sort of papal blessing to the army was asked, well, what should we do? We've opened the gates now, we can get in. And the bishop, well, how do we know who's a Catholic and who's a Cathar? The guy said, the general. And the bishop said, don't worry, kill them all, because God will know the difference. Which is a cynical and terrible thing to have said, obviously. So anyway, I've been revisiting the question of what is purity, what is it to be to have a pure heart. Fascinating stuff. And also the wonderful beatitude, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Again, that's a text for all of us who are interested in peace. And Christ, I think, was preaching a peace revolution. And peacemakers is, in the Latin, isn't whatever the word pacifist is interpreted as meaning. It's beati pacifici. And pacifici is literally a peacemaker, someone who makes peace. And that's what we're told to do, all of us. So, again, how? That's the question. And we might want to think about that in relation to Gaza and Israel, to Palestine, to Ukraine and Russia and all that. How can we be peacemakers? And my French colleague told me there's a phrase in French, the artisans of peace, les artisans, which means kind of someone that makes stuff in French. And that's quite nice. How can we become artisans of peace? Well, I'm trying to give scholarly tools. That's the point of doing this commentary. I want it to be read by not just Christians, but by everyone all over the world who are interested in these questions. Because it's not finished. We haven't done this. We haven't succeeded. Christ gave these teachings and we haven't lived up to them. We've tried, and some different groups have tried. I mean, I was on the Anglican Pacifist Fellowship, committee. I've worked with the Quakers a lot. And this is why the whole field of peace studies came into being, which I was inspired by Scandinavia. I went to Oslo, I went to Stockholm. But, there aren't enough peace research institutes in the world. I wanted one at the University of London, I still do. Because if we're going to be peacemakers, we need to know what it is we're trying to make. Okay, so that's that. The other thing I've been saying in my commentary, and looking back it's interesting, is I believe, as I've said before, that Christ was better educated than people realise. In the common sort of press, Christ was an ignorant carpenter from Galilee, sort of guy from the country, had a country bumpkin accent. He'd read the Bible, but that's about it really, and never had any proper education. I don't think that's true, and I've argued the case in my commentary that I think Joseph and Mary, who were from the higher echelon of Jewish society in Jerusalem, Mary was brought up in the temple as one of the serving ladies, in the high temple, and she would have known the chief rabbi and all the top rabbis in the Sanhedrin. And she was from, and her parents, this is Mary, the mother of Jesus, her parents were from Sepphoris, Anna and Joachim, which I've gone into in the commentary in detail, who were Anna and Joachim. We actually know, people don't know this because it's not in Matthew, but it's in a thing called the Proto-Evangelicum, which is a text that survived. We know who they were. They were wealthy, aristocratic, highly intellectual, very pious, very devout Jewish people who knew the temple, and it was they who gave their daughter Mary to be raised there. So, and Joseph was chosen to be her consort by a committee of the temple, who wanted her to be, when she reached puberty and came of age, she was married off to Joseph. So, and I think it's certain they had links to Alexandria in Egypt, because that's where they go when Herod comes after them and tries to slaughter this child that has been born, who there are rumours and wise men appearing saying he's going to be the Messiah. And Herod thinks, he's going to threaten my kingdom and power base, kill them. So they obviously had links to Egypt, and I think Jesus was later sent back to Egypt for his furthering of education. And there was a huge community of highly intellectual Jewish thinkers in Egypt. Most important is Philo. And he was blending Neoplatonism with Jewish thought. And that is where Jesus is coming from. If you actually look at it historically, that's what his intellectual formation is. He's saying, don't follow the letter of the law. Look at the motivation behind the people who wrote the law, and follow the spirit of the law, because that is the actual philosophical point of law, as I make clear in the commentary. The key word here is righteousness. The law is there. When we fail in righteousness, we need law as a backup. But the thing is to be just righteous. So how do we do that? Well, that's what Jesus is teaching. You have to love God. You have to love truth. You have to love justice. So I think that's all Alexandrian Neoplatonic Judaism. And that's why when he came back, having got his education and started teaching, it was all a bit of a shock for his local, country people who, what is all this? He's a heretic. What do you mean we don't have to follow the law? They didn't understand the level he was coming from. And that, there's a psychologist I also quote in the commentary called Bion, who was one of the best modern 20th century psychologists. He wrote a book about the problem with new ideas coming into an old structure. He calls it the messianic eruption. We've all lived through this. If you try and bring new ideas into an old structure, a committee, a council, a whatever, you're always then targeted and scapegoated as the intruder, the unwelcome one. And so what Bion did is he tried to study the psychoanalytical forces at play here. What is it that makes groups act like that? Because that's what Jesus suffered. And Bion then said, look, we need to seriously study this psychologically. So I've referenced all this. So this is it's a scientific commentary on Matthew. And I don't believe anyone else has ever bothered with it, really, because most scientific minds don't bother with the New Testament. It's passé, it's old hat. Why would we read that? But I'm saying, no, this is really important. We should read it, and we should reclaim it for, intelligent analysis. Okay, so that's really what I wanted to share there. If you want to study more, you'll have to read the commentary when it's finally published, which is going to be in about 6 months at this rate, because it's really slow, this work, because I'm doing it with a lot of detail. Right, any questions about that? Any comments or observations? Have you all read the Gospel of Matthew? Just a little hands up if you have.
A long time ago.
Okay. Jan, did you do any New Testament study in Norway growing up?
Yeah, we had it in school as such, but not the complete.
You didn't have to read the whole thing.
No.
No. I always used to tell my students they have to read the whole thing, because you can't understand it unless, you know. And they would complain and say, no, why do we have to do that? And I would say, look, if you're studying English, you have to read like a whole novel or a whole poem to get a sense of the plot and everything.
Yeah, I guess at my
You know.
my age, what we had to do was to read and learn by heart psalms and various phrases from
The text in
the
Norwegian.
text, yeah. But,
Well, that was
no,
the old way of teaching.
there was no in-depth stuff.
Ah,
Got to know it by heart.
well, there we are. That's the old school stuff. Okay, so let's move on. I'm going to choose, or I'm going to allow one of you guys to choose, one of the 99 Names of Peace chapters. So why don't you choose a number between 1 and 99?
Take 72.
72, okay, we'll see. So this is a new book, it's my most recent book, just published, and there are 99 languages in here. And I give the names of peace in each language and related matters. Let me see, 72. Oh, okay, this is interesting. The language is Albanian, which is in the Balkans, part of Europe, southeastern Europe. And I did part of my degree on Balkan history and won a prize at the University of London. I love the Balkans. And I've met Albanians. They're amazing people. Mother Teresa was from Albania, in fact. And there's a Christian tradition, she was from that. But there's a strong Sufi and Islamic tradition in Albania as well. It's an Indo-European language. And Albanian is the official language of both Albania and Kosovo. It's also spoken quite a lot in North Macedonia and Montenegro. It's got about 7.5 million native speakers. And I give the history of, Albanian as a language. It's written either using the Latin alphabet, and mostly nowadays it's written with the Latin alphabet. There's also 450,000 Albanian speakers in Greece. And also in North America there's quite a few, a diaspora. And in Britain. So what are the words for peace? I go into a lot of detail in the history of the language and its literature and poetry and so on. So the word for peace is as follows: Pake, P-A-Q-E. So peace studies is studimet I paces. Peace magic, which I've coined as a concept and written the only book about, is pake magiki. Peacemaking is pajtues, or pake berja. So some of the words we could recognize, they're similar, like prophet is propheti. Religion is either religion or fe, feha. Research is hulumtim, which I love that word, it's great. A scholar is a jetar, whereas science is shkense. So we can see it's from the same root. Spirit, spirt. It's very similar to spirit. So spiritual enlightenment is, forgive my pronunciation, endricimi spirterror. So it's the same sort of route. So I give all these words, and it's lovely. I mean, it took me a long time to research each of the 99 languages, but because I'm passionate about language and the origins and the etymology of words, I really enjoyed it. Library, biblioteca. Okay, so, and then it's got a project attached. What's the project that goes with Albanian? So, this is an ambitious project. Most of these are actually 99 projects. If any one of them was done, it would probably solve the problems of the world. But if at least like 10 or 15 can be done, if we did all 99, we're living in like, the kingdom of heaven has come, right? Anyway, this one, this is a scholarly project. It's a universal catalogue of all doctoral theses in all universities worldwide since 1200. I'll just let that land a bit, right? So academics like me and, current friends, we love to do our doctorates, whether it's a doctorate of law or philosophy or, the sciences or whatever. And most of us have to write a thesis for that, which is a text, a complicated thing. They're all catalogued away in the university that qualifies you. Nowadays, they're mostly online in electronic format. There's a catalogue in the library of them all. Nobody yet has thought of or managed to compile the list of them all. Now in Britain, the British Library gets a copy of all the theses that are published in a proper British university, and they have an online website where you can look at the summary of it. Some of them have the actual text you can download. Now this is a beautiful thing, it's a wonderful thing. However, I have a very sad announcement to make, which is that about 18 months ago the website was hacked. It's thought by Russian gangsters who shut it down and now demand hundreds of thousands of pounds to release the codes. So if I wasn't against Putin and his gangster state before, this thing alone makes me back the Ukrainians, because that is cultural warfare of the worst kind. It's totally off the scale of what's permissible, in my opinion. We should be collaborating across all nations and cultures. And I would like to encourage Russia, say if you're listening to me, please back off the British Library theses catalogue and build your own in Russia. Let's see what you guys have been doing. I have many Russian philosophy friends. What are their doctorates in? This is how we'd be sharing knowledge across the boundaries. There is one in the States as well, until Trump no doubt wants to shut it down. So I can look up everyone who's done a PhD in America and I can see what they did. It's the Library of Congress runs that. And so what I'm saying is let's all the universities in the world come together, build a huge interactive database online that I can research who in Albania has done their PhD on different brands of Sufism, who in Norway, who in France here. There's one in France, the French National Library already runs one. I can look that up. But there are many countries where I can't. What about in China? What about in Lhasa, in Tibet? Who's doing higher studies in Tibetan, academic, philosophical research? Why is this project important? Well, because those of us who spend years and years beavering away in some branch of research, as I did when I looked at the history of peace, over the last 50 years in depth, and it took me years and years of hard work, I want people to know about it and then benefit from, oh, that's interesting, he's done that, so I don't have to do that. I can do something else that's complementary. How do we go back? This is what's interesting. So, for instance, the Vatican runs several universities, the Gregorian University in Rome. What are their theses all about? And a lot of them will be theological. Very interesting, I'm, as you know, interested in interfaith stuff, so I want to know what has the Vatican academics been saying about this problem of the Son of God. Can we heal the split between Muslims who say Jesus was not the Son of God and Christians who say Jesus was the Son of God? And what about the Jewish intellectuals? What about the University of Jerusalem? What are they saying about Son of God. I'd like a subject searching thing where I can type in, look up every doctoral thesis in any university in the world on the Son of God, right? And they'll all come up. Like there's maybe somebody at the University of Mexico has done something. Like, was the Son of God a concept in the Incan Empire, for instance? I think it was. I think the head Inca was regarded as the son of the sun god, for instance. You know, so this would speed up knowledge. What I'm trying to do through this project is to speed up knowledge, because I'm sick of the sort of anti-intellectual thugs that are trying to control this planet and just turn it into a battleground based on ignoring truths. And ignoring is the origin of ignorance. We're run by people that specialize in ignorance. I'm saying, no, hey, let's wake up. So this is an appeal really to academics and scholars around the world to do our work and get an international database, you know, online thing. But also it's an appeal to the Islamic universities, because I've taught in Islamic Higher Education Institute in London, and I learned so much by doing that, because Islam actually invented the modern university. There was a university in Fez and there was one in Cairo, the Al-Azhar University, when Paris didn't have one, nor did Oxford, nor Cambridge. In Islam, they really valued scholarship and philosophy, and they were doing advanced studies in Baghdad, in Cairo, in Fez, in Morocco. The one in Fez was founded in 859 AD, you know. Now I want to know who, do we have a list of all the doctorate from these Islamic universities? And if not, why not? Let's research it. I was utterly distraught, you know, when I read that in Baghdad in the 1200s, the Mongol army came in and destroyed a lot of the academic institutions. They trashed the bookshops, they killed the scholars, burned the libraries. But what survived? Because in the golden age of Baghdad, from about 800 to 1200, I mean, that was the centre intellectually of the Islamic world. Do we know who was there? Do we know what their theses were? I want to honour those people, you know, who are long dead, and find out. Also in Cordoba, the Islamic universities of southern Spain were producing intellectuals like Ibn Arabi and Ibn Rushd, geniuses, you know, and what were their theses in, you know? So that's the project, and therefore it's a peace project. It's marshalling higher education for intercultural discussion. What about the Palestinian universities? My friend and colleague, Sari Nusaybi, he's the rector of the Palestinian University of East Jerusalem, and he's an expert on Aristotle and Islamic thought. What about the Palestinian universities? Have they got PhD students? Let's, you know, so instead of Israel and Palestinians bombing each other, let's have them studying each other's higher thought and helping each other as scholars. That's what they did in the south of Spain, where Jews and Muslims and Christians all honoured and respected each other. I'd like to see that again in the entire Middle East. Okay, there are 30,000 universities on the planet at the moment, about. So it's a big project. But hey, you know, it's either that or we're just going to go into the abyss of ignorant people. So let's do it. Okay, that's the project. I think it's an exciting one. Any questions or comments? Yeah, Amal.
Yeah, because with that project, for me, it's very close to the AI possibility we have now to search in all humankind knowledge.
Yes.
Maybe some of the books, they have not been transcribed or scanned on a digital format.
Yeah.
But the question raised by AI is